The rain had been falling in steady sheets since dawn, soaking the Texas roads and casting everything in a curtain of gray. Savannah Miller, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, squinted through the windshield as her wipers worked furiously to clear a path ahead. The GPS on her phone chirped its final instructions. Turn left in 100 feet. Destination will be on your right. She glanced at the screen, then up at the overgrown path, barely visible off the rural highway. If it hadn't been for the old rusted mailbox with the faded letters A. Miller stenciled across the front, she might have missed it entirely. Savannah turned in, her small SUV jostling over potholes and packed mud. On either side, tall trees leaned in like they were guarding secrets from the world. It had been years since she'd thought about this place, Willow Glen Farm, and even then, it was always as a blurry image in the back of her childhood memories. Her grandfather, Arthur Miller, had been a mystery, a name barely whispered in her family, a shadow her parents had deliberately kept at a distance. Savannah parked in front of the farmhouse. The once white siding was now a dull gray, paint peeling, porch slats sagging. The house looked like it hadn't taken a deep breath in a decade. For a moment, she sat in silence, engine ticking in the quiet before shutting it off. The rain still hammered her windshield. She hadn't planned to come, not really. When the lawyer called last week to inform her of Arthur Miller's death, she'd almost declined the trip altogether. But then came the kicker. She was named sole beneficiary of his estate. And though it was listed officially as an abandoned farm property in Ashwood Hollow, Missouri, something in the lawyer's tone had piqued her curiosity. Savannah was a digital legal archivist in Austin. Her days were structured, methodical, clean. No mud, no ghosts, and certainly no abandoned farms in the middle of nowhere. Yet here she was. She popped the trunk, pulled out her overnight bag, and made a run for the porch. The keys the lawyer had sent by courier felt cold in her hand. The old brass key slid into the lock with some resistance, then turned with a loud clunk. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a world frozen in time. The scent hit her first. Dust, old wood, maybe a trace of something herbal and earthy. She stepped inside, dripping on a worn rug that had once been red, but now looked the color of rust. The living room was lined with bookshelves filled with aging volumes. A fireplace stood unused, its mantel still holding a faded photo of a woman Savannah didn't recognize. She left her bag near the doorway and walked through the house like a visitor at a museum. The kitchen still had canned goods lined up in the pantry, and the fridge, though unplugged, was clean. Upstairs, the bedrooms were equally untouched, sheets folded, curtains drawn. Her grandfather's room remained shut, and somehow she didn't feel ready to open it. Savannah chose the guest room she barely remembered sleeping in as a child. After laying out fresh sheets she'd brought with her, she came back downstairs, determined to start clearing out at least one room before the day was over. She picked the study. The old desk was a beast of furniture, carved mahogany, with pigeonholes stuffed with papers. Savannah ran a finger over the dusty surface, uncovering patches of the wood's original shine. As she opened the drawers, she found ledgers, unpaid bills, old postcards, and then something different. A worn, leather-bound journal lay wedged behind a stack of seed catalogs. She picked it up gently, brushing away dust. Inside, the first few pages were mundane. Notes about crop rotations, equipment repairs, weather records. But then, abruptly, the tone shifted. They're still watching. Every week someone drives by slow. I haven't destroyed it yet. Can't bring myself to. But they know. Savannah blinked. Another page. If anything happens to me, don't go near the basement. She flipped further. More entries, increasingly erratic, paranoid. Mentions of them, of the Bishop contracts, and something called AC. She set the journal down and exhaled. There was a noise, a soft creak from beneath her feet. She looked down. The wooden floor of the study was uneven in one corner, a single plank slightly raised along one edge. Savannah knelt and pressed her hand to it. The wood gave under her weight and pivoted upward with a dry groan. Inside the narrow crawl space lay a bundle wrapped in burlap. With care, she pulled it out. Unwrapping it revealed an object that made her breath catch. A brass key, large and antique, ornately carved with unfamiliar symbols etched around its bow. It looked like it belonged in a museum or a Gothic novel. She turned it over in her hands. The symbols, something about them tickled the edge of her memory. She wasn't a historian, but years working with legal archives had taught her to recognize recurring iconography. Whatever this key opened, it wasn't anything ordinary. And someone, maybe multiple someones, had spent years making sure it stayed locked. Rain lashed harder against the windows as Savannah sat back on her heels, the key cradled in her hands. She should call the lawyer, or maybe leave. Let the professionals handle whatever this was. But something deeper, more primal, held her rooted. Maybe it was the look in her grandfather's slanted scrawl, the urgency, the warning. Or maybe it was that the story she'd been told all her life, that Arthur Miller was just an eccentric old man best forgotten, was starting to crack. She looked back toward the journal, still open on the desk. Don't go near the basement. Too late for that. The morning air at Ashwood Hollow carried a sharp crispness, a reminder that autumn had begun to settle in. Savannah awoke on the guest room mattress, the old springs beneath her groaning as she shifted. The night before had left her rattled. Finding her grandfather's journal, the cryptic warnings about being watched, and the strange, antique brass key hidden beneath a loose floorboard. She pulled the heavy quilt aside and sat up, glancing at the key resting on the nightstand. Its ornate engravings shimmered in the slant of sunlight, creeping through the window. Savannah picked it up again, running her fingers over the mysterious symbols carved into its bow. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, and given her background in digitizing old court documents and historical archives, that was saying something. After a quick cup of instant coffee in the kitchen, if the yellowing water from the rusty tap could be called that, Savannah pulled on her boots and grabbed a flashlight. Determined to find what the key unlocked, she began scouring the farmhouse for anything with a matching keyhole. Cabinets, closets, trunks, even the cellar door. Nothing seemed to fit. She paused in front of the fireplace in the study, her eyes catching the edge of an old landscape painting hanging askew. Curiosity tugged at her. She reached up and carefully lifted it off its hook. Behind the frame, the wall was oddly textured. Taped to the back of the painting was a folded piece of yellowed parchment. Her breath hitched as she unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn map, detailed, sketched in neat, deliberate lines. The layout of the farm was unmistakable, labeled with faded ink: fields, barns, outbuildings, and a small pond. But one spot, near the back edge of the property, just behind the old horse barn, was circled multiple times in red. The letters AC were scribbled beside it. That alone might have meant little, except for the fact that the same strange symbol from the brass key was also drawn next to it. Savannah felt a cold ripple creep up her spine. This wasn't random. Her grandfather had hidden the map on purpose. But what was AC? A storage shed? A trap door? A warning? She grabbed her jacket, tucked the key and map into her inner pocket, and stepped outside. The morning sun barely pierced the haze that clung to the hollows, casting a golden glow over the brittle, frost-kissed grass. As she made her way toward the barn, her boots squelched in patches of muddy ground, softened by last night's rain. The barn loomed ahead, its red paint peeling like sunburned skin, its roof sagging in the middle. Savannah pushed the heavy wooden door open. It groaned, echoing across the space like a warning call. Inside, dust floated like spirits in the shafts of sunlight cutting through broken slats. Forgotten tools, hay bales, and rusted machinery cluttered the space. She moved cautiously, referencing the map again. The circled spot was supposed to be near the northwest corner. That's when she noticed something odd. A stack of large, empty feed bins pushed haphazardly against the wall. Savannah stepped closer, running her hand along the edges. One bin felt lighter, almost hollow. She grabbed its rim and heaved. The bin wobbled, scraped along the floor, and then revealed a section of wall made of a different wood altogether. A slightly darker panel, seamless, almost undetectable, unless you knew what to look for. She tapped it, hollow. Heart racing, Savannah pressed her palm against the center. Nothing. She pushed to one side, still nothing. Then she remembered the key. Fingers trembling, she pulled it from her coat and examined the wall again. Just below knee height, Nestled behind a dangling coil of rope was a tiny keyhole. She knelt, inserted the key, and turned. Click. The wall creaked. A seam appeared. With a slow groan, the false panel swung open, revealing a stone-lined staircase descending into darkness. The air that drifted up was damp and old, tinged with mold and something else. Paper. Old paper. Savannah flicked on her flashlight. Each step creaked under her weight, and she tested them carefully, half expecting one to crumble. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a rectangular underground room. The walls were made of fitted stone, the floor packed dirt. But this was no root cellar. It was an archive. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes, folders, and binders. A large wooden table stood in the center, covered in yellowed documents, some still arranged with methodical care. A dehumidifier in the corner was silent, long since dead, but its presence told her this space was meant for preservation. Her grandfather hadn't just been storing junk, he had been collecting. She moved to the table. On top were water-stained notebooks and a stack of manila folders marked with years in thick black marker. 1968, 1974, 1989. Some had labels like crop failures, Evans fire, city council votes. A single open binder caught her eye. Inside, clipped to the front, was a photograph of a woman, Carol Miller, her grandmother. Savannah's throat tightened. She turned the page. Lab reports, water test results, medical charts, notes in her grandfather's handwriting. Unusual cancer cluster. Water upstream shows high presence of methylatrazine, originates from Bishop Holdings Fields. She recognized the name instantly. The Bishop family was one of the most prominent in Missouri's agricultural industry, known for their influence and reach. Savannah remembered seeing their logo on seed bags and grain silos throughout the state. But what were they doing on her grandfather's secret documents? Another folder labeled Carol Personal contained correspondence between Arthur Miller and local health departments, many of them stamped rejected or inconclusive. But buried among them was a short note, handwritten. Carol's diagnosis matches that of Evans' family and Monroe case, all downstream of Bishop Trial Fields. I have the soil tests. If anything happens to me, don't trust Clarence Rowe. He's theirs. Savannah's breath hitched. That name again, Evans. And now, another, Clarence Rowe. The name was unfamiliar, but clearly her grandfather had reasons not to trust him. She glanced toward the shelves. More boxes waited. And then she saw it. On the far wall, just above a cabinet, scrawled in chalk, "The truth stays buried, but not forever." Savannah stood in the stillness of the underground room, heart pounding. Whatever her grandfather had uncovered, he had sacrificed everything to preserve it. And now, by pure chance, or fate, she was the one holding the key. The evidence tied her grandmother's cancer to environmental poisoning. It implicated one of the most powerful families in Missouri. And it explained the silence, the family estrangement, the warnings, the quiet disappearance of Arthur Miller from his community. Now, it all pointed to one thing. This wasn't about land. It was about secrets. Secrets someone had gone to great lengths to bury. Savannah turned toward the stairs, the brass key still cold in her hand. She wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. The morning after her discovery in the underground archive, Savannah Miller sat in the old kitchen of the farmhouse with a lukewarm mug of coffee in her hand. The silence around her felt heavy, almost sacred, after the torrent of revelations from the night before. The key, the ledger, the locked file cabinet filled with damning documents. They hadn't just opened a door beneath her grandfather's barn. They had opened a door to a truth her family had buried, one she was no longer sure she was prepared to handle. Savannah leaned back in the creaky wooden chair, staring at the laptop she had pulled from her bag. The documents she scanned late into the night were now sitting in a secure folder on her cloud drive, protected by layers of encryption. Arthur Miller, her reclusive grandfather, hadn't been delusional. He had been careful, strategic, and likely terrified. She rubbed her temples. There was still so much she didn't understand. Who were the Bishops, really? Why had they gone to such lengths to silence her grandfather? And why had her own parents severed ties so completely without ever giving her a full explanation? A soft knock at the front door startled her. She stood, heart pounding slightly, and cautiously approached. Through the warped glass of the door, she could make out a tall figure wearing a rain jacket, his face partially obscured by the hood. Savannah opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" The man pulled back his hood to reveal a rugged, unshaven face and piercing hazel eyes. He looked vaguely familiar. "Savannah Miller?" Her muscles tensed. "Who's asking?" "Eli Barrett. I'm a journalist with the Missouri Free Voice. Your grandfather and I were in contact a few years ago. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should check in here." She opened the door a little wider, still cautious. "My grandfather passed away 2 weeks ago." Eli gave a soft, respectful nod. "I know. That's why I'm here." After a moment of internal debate, Savannah stepped aside and let him in. The farmhouse was cold, and the scent of old books and damp wood still hung in the air. She motioned toward the kitchen. "We can talk in there." Eli took a seat at the table, glancing around at the aging wallpaper and the half-sorted boxes. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "Your grandfather was a brave man. Paranoid maybe, but not without reason." Savannah sat across from him. "You said he contacted you?" Eli nodded. "About 3 years ago. He said he had information that could expose widespread corruption tied to the Bishop family, environmental damage, land fraud, even a few suspicious deaths. He sent me pieces here and there, but then he just disappeared. I tried following up, but I was told he was placed in a long-term care facility." Savannah frowned. "That part I didn't know. My parents never mentioned it. In fact, they never mentioned him at all." Eli leaned forward. "I don't mean to alarm you, but if what he found is as big as I think it is, there's a good chance someone pressured your family to stay quiet." She hesitated, then stood and crossed the room. From beneath a pile of maps and folders on the counter, she retrieved the thick file she'd taken from the underground room. She slid it across the table. "You might want to look at this first." Eli opened the folder, his eyes scanning rapidly over the contents. His brows furrowed, and he let out a slow whistle. "So, he really found it. Jesus, this is worse than I thought." He pulled out a photograph. Blackened fields near what appeared to be Evans' farm, with a timestamp from 1987. Savannah watched his expression darken. "David and Martha Evans," he muttered. "They died in a barn fire after refusing to sell their land to the Bishops. It was ruled an accident, but rumors flew for years that it wasn't. Your grandfather's notes suggest the fire was deliberate." Savannah felt a chill. Why would the Bishops want their land so badly? "Control," Eli said without hesitation. "The Bishop family owns over 60% of Ashwood Hollow and much of the surrounding counties. Their agribusiness empire is built on acquiring smaller farms, usually through pressure tactics. And your grandfather, he was gathering proof." He looked up at her. "Do you know how dangerous this makes you?" Savannah crossed her arms. "I didn't until last night." Eli leaned back, exhaling. "I should have come sooner. I figured the trail had gone cold, but seeing this, there are documents in here that could launch a federal investigation." They sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling like dust in the old farmhouse. Finally, Savannah spoke. "Do you think they had something to do with my grandmother's death? Carol Miller died of a rare cancer when I was a kid. Grandpa's notes mention chemical runoff." Eli nodded grimly. "It's likely. I have contacts who've been trying to prove that the Bishops used banned pesticides long after they were outlawed. Your grandfather might have had the evidence they couldn't find." She shivered. "There's more. I found a key, an old brass one. It led to a hidden room under the barn. The documents, the maps, the recordings, they were all down there. He knew someone would come looking." Eli looked impressed. "Arthur was smarter than anyone gave him credit for." Savannah reached for another file. "There's a recording, you should hear it." She set her laptop on the table, navigated to a folder titled Archive Audio, and played the most chilling clip. It was Arthur's voice, low and urgent. "If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't stop them. The Bishops are behind everything. The fires, the contamination, Carol's death. I have the proof, but if they get to it before you do, it might disappear forever." Another voice chimed in, distorted but clearly male. "Burn the records, Arthur. No one needs to know what happened with Carol." Savannah paused the audio. Her hands trembled. Eli's face was pale. "That That changes everything. It does, Savannah said. But I don't know what to do next. I can't run an investigation. I'm not a lawyer or a journalist. I'm just a records specialist. Eli met her gaze. But you have the truth. That makes you more powerful than you think. He stood and paced the kitchen. If we leak part of this to the press now, we risk alerting them before we have enough to make it stick. But if we gather more, secure allies, and make a coordinated release, we could bring the whole house down. Savannah felt something rising inside her. Not fear, exactly. Not anymore. Resolve. Purpose. Then let's do it right. Let's finish what Grandpa started. Eli smiled for the first time. You sound just like him. She stared out the window, where the gray sky hung low over the fields. The land was quiet now, but beneath the surface, secrets were stirring. Truths long buried were clawing their way into the light. Savannah turned back to Eli. If we're doing this, we do it together. He nodded. Together. But neither of them knew that someone was already watching from the road just beyond the tree line. A black SUV, parked too long to be casual, idled with its engine off. The silhouette inside raised a phone to their ear. They found it, the voice said. She found the archive. It's starting again. The line went silent. Hook. Eli turned back toward Savannah, voice steady. So, do you want to bring the truth to light? Or bury it like they hoped you would? Savannah didn't hesitate. We burned them to the ground. The morning after Eli's visit dawned cool and foggy. Savannah stood on the porch of the farmhouse, her fingers curled around a steaming mug of black coffee, staring out at the mist rolling over the fields like a slow, silent tide. The barn, the sagging fence lines, the overgrown pasture, all of it was draped in an eerie stillness that felt more like a warning than a peaceful morning. Her sleep had been fractured, disturbed by dreams of her grandmother's face, faint, flickering like candlelight, saying nothing, only watching. Savannah had awoken with a chill in her spine and the faintest echo of a voice whispering, "Don't trust them." Inside, Eli had already set up his laptop on the kitchen table. He looked every bit the modern journalist, rolled-up sleeves, worn notebook full of scrawls, and the relentless energy of someone chasing a story too big to ignore. I reviewed some of the files from the external drive, he said, eyes focused on the screen. Your grandfather wasn't just keeping records. He was documenting a pattern, deliberate contamination, land acquisitions, financial pressure, and threats. It's systemic. The Bishops have a footprint in nearly every farm foreclosure in this region over the past 40 years. Savannah sat across from him, the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. And no one ever talked? No one ever tried to stop them? Eli met her gaze. People were scared, and the few who did speak up, they lost everything. Before she could respond, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, area code local. She hesitated, then answered. Ms. Miller, this is Clarence Rowe. I represent the Bishop family. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you. Her throat tightened. What about? We understand you've inherited Willow Creek Farm. The Bishops are prepared to make a generous offer for the property. Cash. Immediate transfer. No hassle. Savannah gripped the phone tighter. Why would the Bishops want this place? Sentimental value, he replied smoothly. Your grandfather and Mr. Bishop had a long-standing understanding. I'll be in Ashwood Hollow tomorrow morning. Think it over. The line went dead. Savannah placed the phone on the table like it had burned her hand. Eli leaned forward. That was fast. They're nervous. Good, Savannah said, her voice harder than she expected. Let them be. The rest of the day passed in tense, methodical sorting. Savannah and Eli went back into the hidden archive, cataloging more documents. In a locked metal cabinet beneath one of the shelves, they found a wooden box containing sealed plastic bags with soil and water samples. Each was labeled with dates, locations, and test results. Savannah pulled out one bag. The label read, Miller Well, 2001. Beneath it, handwritten in Arthur's familiar slanted script, pesticide traces consistent with compound X47, banned in '84. Source, Bishop Fields. Eli exhaled slowly. This is gold. legal gold. Savannah's eyes narrowed. If we can prove it's still in the soil or water, then this isn't just history. It's an ongoing crime. Eli nodded. We need to get fresh samples, independent laboratory chain of custody documentation, everything squeaky clean. She agreed. They documented everything meticulously, photographing, labeling, backing up files on 2 separate drives. That night, Savannah sat alone in her grandfather's office, staring at the audio cassette she'd found tucked in a manila envelope labeled simply Carol. She inserted the tape into a dusty cassette player she'd found in the study. A low static buzzed, then a familiar voice, Arthur's, tired, low. If you're hearing this, I guess I couldn't stop them. I tried, Carol. God knows I tried. The Bishop land. They poisoned it on purpose. You were never supposed to get sick. They told me to burn the reports, said they'd make it all go away. But I couldn't. I couldn't let them win. Then another voice, a man's, sharp and urgent. Arthur, you need to get rid of that box. Burn it. No one can know what happened to Carol. There was a pause, a muffled scuffle. Then silence. Savannah sat frozen, the tape still spinning in the player. Her grandmother hadn't just been collateral damage. She'd been targeted. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You don't know what you're messing with. Sell the farm. Walk away. She read the message twice, her hands steady. They're scared, she whispered, and then aloud to the shadows of the old house. So am I, but I'm staying. Savannah barely slept that night. Every creak in the old farmhouse made her flinch. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper from someone watching outside. The moon hung low over Ashwood Hollow, casting eerie shadows through the warped window panes. The discovery of the audio tape, the voice ordering Arthur to burn the ledger, echoed in her head like a ghost refusing to fade. She rose before dawn, the house still cloaked in silence. Pouring herself a cup of weak, instant coffee, she sat at the kitchen table, flipping through more of her grandfather's papers. There were folders labeled with dates, town names, and strange codes. She found a file marked Evans Fire. Inside were scorched newspaper clippings, photos of the charred remains of a farmhouse, and a police report that declared the cause inconclusive, but likely electrical. Arthur had scribbled in the margins, they refused the offer. 2 weeks later, everything gone. Savannah exhaled slowly. Everything was beginning to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern. And in the center of that pattern stood one name that kept repeating across different reports: Bishop. A knock on the front door startled her. It was early, far too early for casual visitors. She peeked through the curtain and immediately felt a twinge of unease. A man stood at the doorstep, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and sunglasses, despite the morning haze. He wore a tailored brown leather jacket, jeans too clean for a man from the area, and a quiet, composed expression that unsettled her more than any scowl might have. She opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, polite but firm. "Savannah Miller, my name is Russell Bishop. I believe you and I need to have a conversation." Her spine stiffened. The name sent a chill down her arms. "I'm not sure there's anything to talk about." "I think there is. May I come in?" She hesitated for a long beat. Every fiber in her body screamed no, but some voice, maybe curiosity, maybe a desire to see the face of her opposition, made her open the door. They sat across from each other in the living room. Russell moved with the easy confidence of someone used to owning the space he entered. "My father, Wallace Bishop, and your grandfather didn't see eye to eye," he began. "But that was a long time ago. Whatever disagreements they had, dredging them up now only serves to hurt a lot of people." Savannah narrowed her eyes. "Is that why someone told my grandfather to burn his records? Is that why he ended up in a care home under a suspicious mental health diagnosis?" Russell didn't blink. "That was before my time, but I assure you, any actions taken were for the good of the community. You start waving old paper around, accusing respected families of arson and poisoning wells, you're going to find yourself very alone." "Funny," she said, "because I'm starting to feel less alone by the day." A flicker of something passed across his face. Annoyance? Recognition? "You're digging into something dangerous, Miss Miller. The past is messy. People get hurt. You mean like Carol Miller? Savannah asked, watching him closely. He didn't flinch, but he also didn't deny it. After he left, Savannah immediately called Eli. Within the hour, he arrived with his laptop and an investigative gleam in his eye. Russell Bishop showed up here? He asked, stunned. Sat right in that chair like he owned the place, she muttered. Eli wasted no time. He began tracing Russell Bishop's financial activities, campaign contributions, business records. What he found was a web of political donations, shell companies, and contracts with the county board that stunk of backroom deals. This isn't just environmental damage. This is corruption, Eli muttered. This guy's fingerprints are on everything from the mayor's last campaign to the school board's pesticide supplier. Savannah sat down beside him, scanning the files. Look at this, she said, pointing to a scanned check. Why is the Bishop Foundation donating $10,000 to Dr. Kyle Monroe? He was Grandma Carol's doctor. Eli sat back. That's either hush money or a payoff. It took hours to find Dr. Monroe's current practice. He had moved to a clinic 2 counties over. Savannah and Eli drove there together, a 2-hour trip through rain-slick back roads and sleepy rural towns. They found him at a modest office, tucked beside a bakery and a thrift store. He was in his late 60s, with thinning white hair, thick glasses, and a guarded expression. When Savannah introduced herself, he looked as though he might faint. Miss Miller, he said slowly, your grandfather tried to warn me you might come someday. They spoke in his office, blinds drawn. I treated your grandmother for the last 7 months of her life. The cancer she had, aggressive, rare, environmentally triggered. When I saw similar cases popping up in other families nearby, I filed a report. A week later, my car was vandalized. The lab I used said they lost my samples. Then I got a visit from a man offering a large donation to the clinic, no strings attached, if I just stayed quiet. Was it Russell Bishop? Savannah asked. Dr. Monroe hesitated, then nodded. I wanted to speak out, he said, but I had a family to protect. I thought maybe, if enough time passed, someone else would come forward, but no one ever did. Savannah reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. I think that time is now. Dr. Monroe read the documents in silence. Soil samples, handwritten ledgers, photos, maps. Arthur Miller had kept everything. Finally, he looked up. I'll do it. I'll testify. Relief washed over Savannah like a tide. It felt like momentum, like progress. For the first time, it felt like maybe the truth would win. But 3 hours later, as they returned to Ashwood Hollow, Savannah received a call from an unknown number. A panicked nurse on the other end said Dr. Monroe had disappeared, left the clinic mid-afternoon, and never returned home. His phone was off. His office was ransacked. Savannah stared at the phone, her hands trembling. Eli said quietly, "They're tightening the noose. They know we're close." Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The farmhouse creaked as though in warning. The game had shifted, the curtain had lifted, and the man behind it was watching. The night air was thick with silence, heavy as wet wool. Savannah stood by the window of the guest bedroom, peering out into the fields beyond the old Miller farmhouse. The soft glow of the porch light spilled onto the cracked steps, revealing nothing but a still darkness beyond. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Or perhaps already there. Her phone buzzed, jolting her. She picked it up, expecting a message from Eli or Agnes. Instead, the screen displayed unknown caller. She hesitated, then answered. A male voice crackled on the other end, cold and unfamiliar. "Stop digging, Miss Miller, or you'll be the next name on the ledger." Click. No time for a response. No caller ID. Just the echo of a threat that vibrated through her bones. Her breath caught in her throat, heart hammering wildly as she stared at the screen. The silence that followed seemed more oppressive than the threat itself. Savannah dialed Eli immediately. It rang once, twice. "Eli?" "Savannah, everything okay?" he asked, groggy but alert. "I just got a call, no name. Someone told me to stop digging or I'd be next." There was a pause, then Eli's voice sharpened. "Stay put, lock your doors, I'll be there in 20. She did as told, bolting every entrance, even dragging an old dresser in front of the kitchen door. Her hands shook, but her resolve hardened. She wouldn't back down. When Eli arrived, he had more than just concern on his face. He had a plan. "We need to control the narrative," he said as he set up his laptop on the kitchen table. "The Bishop family's game has always been to work in the dark. We're going to shine a light." Together, they picked through the files Savannah had recovered. They scanned test results, photographs, notes in Arthur's handwriting. They packaged a short report and sent it, anonymously, to a local news station known for its independence, Channel 12 Springfield. The anchor was a trusted face, someone who had a reputation for digging up uncomfortable truths. Savannah didn't expect a full expose overnight, but even a whisper in the right place could become thunder. While Eli continued compiling digital backups, Savannah walked the perimeter of the house with a flashlight. Something was off. The wind stirred leaves, but one corner of the porch had scuffed dirt, fresh. She crouched, brushing the earth away. Something metallic caught the light, a small device, square, black, and wired. She brought it inside, and Eli's face went white. "That's a signal transmitter. Someone's been monitoring this house, maybe for years." Savannah's stomach turned. "They've been watching everything?" Eli nodded grimly. "Probably. Conversations, movements. Even now, they might know we're talking." That night, Eli installed a network of security cameras around the property. They couldn't trust local authorities, not with the Bishop's influence. But they could document everything. If anything happened, there would be footage. As they were finishing the setup near midnight, a sound cut through the silence, gravel crunching beneath tires. They ducked behind a curtain. A black SUV rolled slowly into the driveway. It didn't park. It stopped just outside the gate. The engine idled. No one got out. Then the driver's side door opened. A man in a dark jacket stepped out, placed a thick envelope at the foot of the mailbox, and returned to the SUV. The vehicle drove off without a word. Eli waited a few minutes, then approached the mailbox. Inside was a manila folder with no markings. He opened it under the porch light. "These are copies," he said in disbelief. "From the hidden archive, from the basement, the ones we haven't even touched yet." Savannah's breath hitched. "Someone stole them?" Eli nodded. "Someone who wants us to know they've been here and could come again." Inside the folder were highlighted notes, specific pages marked with red paper clips. All of them corresponded to the Bishop family's most damning secrets: names, transactions, even a chemical supply manifest dated only 2 years ago. "They're not just sending a message," Savannah whispered. "They're taunting us, or warning us, that they're still in control." But Eli shook his head. "Or maybe someone on the inside is trying to help, and they want to stay anonymous." Savannah wasn't sure what terrified her more: the enemies watching from the shadows, or the allies too afraid to step into the light. She looked out into the night, back toward the fields where the SUV had vanished. The war had moved closer, and now it was at her doorstep. The morning sunlight filtered through the gauzy curtains of the upstairs guest bedroom at the farm, casting soft, golden streaks across Savannah's face. But there was no peace in the warmth. She hadn't slept. Not really. The anonymous call from the night before still echoed in her mind. "Stop digging or you'll be next." Savannah had replayed that voice over and over. Calm, male, measured. Too professional to be a prank. She hadn't told Eli everything about the call, only the essentials. She didn't want him to worry more than he already was. But she could feel the weight of this choice pressing on her chest like a stone. Walk away, or push forward and risk everything. Her phone buzzed, a new text from Eli. "Eli, morning. Clarence Rowe called me. Wants to meet, says it's urgent." Savannah's stomach tightened. Clarence Rowe, the Bishop family snake in a suit. The last time he had reached out, he'd offered to buy the farm for a price so high, it practically screamed hush money. She texted back, "Where and when?" "I'm coming with you." They met at a small, upscale cafe near the edge of town, the kind of place where the baristas knew your name if your last name opened doors. Eli was already seated when Savannah arrived, a cup of untouched black coffee in front of him. He gave her a nod, a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. Clarence Rowe entered 2 minutes later, dressed immaculately in a navy blazer, crisp white shirt, no tie. He sat down without ordering anything, placed a sleek leather folder on the table, and looked between the two of them. "Miss Miller, Mr. Barrett," he began, tone smooth as always. "I'll get right to it. My clients want to avoid further, unpleasantness. They're willing to make a final offer. $1 million. Savannah blinked. Eli straightened. $1 million, Rowe repeated, sliding the folder across the table. "In exchange for the farm, and naturally, all associated materials in your possession. Files, recordings, journals, anything you've taken from the property." Savannah stared at him, the folder unopened. She felt the weight of the figure, the temptation of it. $1 million would change her life forever. No more debt, no more uncertainty. She could walk away, maybe even buy her own peaceful plot of land somewhere, start over. But then she thought of the photograph of Carol, the journal entries, the hidden room, the evidence, and that call, the voice. Eli was watching her, not speaking, waiting. She reached across the table and pushed the folder back to Rowe. "No." Rowe didn't blink. "I urge you to consider carefully." "I have," Savannah replied. "My answer is still no." Back at the farm, the tension in the air had thickened. Every car that passed down the dirt road made Savannah's shoulders tighten. Every shadow outside seemed to stretch farther than it should. They worked silently for hours, backing up more files, digitizing everything left in the archive. Savannah had developed a system, naming, tagging, organizing. But the pile never seemed to get smaller. "We need to go bigger," Eli said suddenly. "The local outlet helped, but it's not enough. The bishops still control too much here." "You have someone in mind?" "An editor at a national publication in Chicago. She's been trying to get traction on environmental corruption stories, and this one has teeth. I'll head up tomorrow." Savannah nodded, but something in her twisted at the thought of being alone. Still, she knew it had to be done. That night, as she prepared for bed, Savannah's phone rang again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" No voice this time, only static. Then a faint click. She stood still for a long moment, phone pressed to her ear, heart pounding. The next morning, Savannah drove 2 towns over to meet a contact Agnes had connected her with, a regional environmental officer named Dana Phelps. Dana had once worked on EPA investigations before switching to state-level work. She was tough, early 40s, and clearly knew more than she said over coffee. "Word is," Dana said, leaning in, "you've got something solid. I have water samples, soil tests, historical documentation, even internal memos. My grandfather kept everything, and recent tests show the contamination's still active." Dana whistled low. "That's big, but you need institutional backing. I'm not supposed to stick my neck out. But if what you're saying is true, I might not be the only one tired of the bishop leash." Savannah passed her a flash drive. "Proof." Dana took it, pocketed it without fanfare. "You didn't get this from me. Not yet." Later that afternoon, Savannah was back at the farm. Eli had left for Chicago, and the house felt far too quiet. She walked the property restlessly, boots crunching over gravel and fallen leaves. When she reached the edge of the property near the creek, she paused. The sunlight caught on the water, serene, almost beautiful. But beneath it was poison. She turned and headed back. She needed to get back to work. There was still more to uncover. Inside, she resumed digitizing. One of the last binders held fresh test results, dated just 3 months ago. Her grandfather hadn't stopped. Even from his care facility, he'd continued to run tests through aliases and distant labs. She opened the envelope. The numbers were staggering. The water was still highly contaminated, chemicals with known carcinogenic properties. The soil was leaching toxins. And the downstream impact, worse than she'd realized, this wasn't just old crimes. This was happening now. Outside, a storm was rolling in. Savannah barely noticed. She was too busy writing up a summary. By the time the first drops hit the tin roof of the barn, she was emailing Dana Phelps a formal report, her first official step toward blowing the lid off everything. She stood, stretched, and walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, then paused, stared into the glass, and poured it down the sink. Night had settled heavily over Ashwood Hollow, a thick fog clinging low to the ground and wrapping the old Miller farm in an eerie silence. The sky was overcast, and the crescent moon cast only a dim, silvery sheen on the fields. Inside the farmhouse, Savannah and Eli were bent over a table in the dining room, documents and flash drives spread out in a careful grid. They had been working nonstop for 2 days, racing against an invisible clock, their nerves frayed and minds sharp with urgency. "This is the last batch," Eli said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. His hands were calloused, trembling slightly. "The scans from the soil reports in 1996 and 1997, these might be the most damning of all." Savannah nodded, her eyes scanning the content. "It's enough to show a pattern, to prove this wasn't negligence. It was targeted, systematic." Their plan was clear: distribute the files to multiple news outlets, environmental watchdogs, and legal organizations simultaneously. But before they could execute, they needed to recover the final set of physical evidence, buried in the deepest corner of the underground archive. "Let's get it now," Savannah said, already rising from her chair. "The sooner we send everything out, the less power they have over us." They bundled up, flashlights, hard drives, gloves, and headed to the barn. The night air was biting cold, and the fog thickened with each step. As they entered through the heavy sliding door, the familiar creak seemed louder in the stillness. The entrance to the hidden archive opened with a low groan. Savannah led the way down the stone steps, flashlight beam cutting through the dust-choked air. They reached the archive and moved quickly, retrieving the remaining documents, packing them into waterproof satchels. Then it happened. A thud above them. Eli froze. Savannah glanced at him, her expression tight. Was that? Someone's up there. They both went silent, breathing barely audible. A second thud, then the unmistakable sound of footsteps across the barn floor. Savannah motioned toward the far corner, where a small side alcove offered partial concealment. They ducked behind a shelf of old equipment, peeking through the slats. The wooden trapdoor creaked open. A beam of light scanned the room from above. Boots descended the steps. 2 pairs. One belonged to a tall man in a black tactical jacket, the other to a shorter, heavier figure. Neither of them spoke, but their movements were deliberate, military-like. Eli leaned toward Savannah and whispered, "They're not here to steal. They're here to silence." Savannah's hand moved slowly to her coat pocket, where her grandfather's revolver rested, cold and heavy. She hated the feel of it, but she was glad she had it. The intruders moved through the room with precision, scanning shelves, opening drawers. One of them kicked open the file cabinet, empty. The man hissed a curse. "Check the table," the taller one said. His voice was sharp, clipped. Savannah's breath caught. If they found the flash drives in the wrong place. But before the men could reach it, the silence shattered. "Freeze! Hands where I can see them!" Voices exploded above. Floodlights spilled down through the trapdoor. The sound of boots pounded the barn floor. Chaos erupted. The 2 intruders bolted for the stairs. Eli stood, flashlight beam flickering as he shouted, "They're trying to escape." Savannah drew the revolver and fired a warning shot into the dirt floor, the sound deafening. The taller man spun toward her, startled, then dove behind a shelf. A firefight seemed imminent, until a swarm of agents descended the staircase, shouting commands, pinning both intruders to the ground. State police. Media had arrived too, summoned by Agnes and Eli's last-minute alert. It was over in minutes. One of the intruders tried to bolt when cuffed, knocking over a metal box. Papers scattered. Savannah stooped to retrieve them, only to freeze. "Eli," she whispered. He joined her, peering over her shoulder. In her hands was a folded sheet with the heading, "Priority Targets." Underneath were 10 names. At the top of the list, Savannah Miller. "They were going to eliminate everyone tied to this investigation," Eli said, horror rising in his voice. "We were never just a nuisance to them. We were threats." Savannah felt a cold resolve settle in her bones. The game had changed. The Bishop family had just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. By morning, news vans lined the narrow road to the Miller farm. Helicopters hovered overhead. The state attorney general arrived shortly after sunrise, escorted by environmental agents and a forensic team. The raid, captured in full by hidden cameras Eli had placed earlier in the week, was already being broadcast on local channels. The footage showed everything: the break-in, the confrontation, the arrests. Savannah watched from the porch, arms folded tight across her chest. Her face was pale, but unflinching. "We send the files today," she said to Eli. "All of them. Everywhere." He nodded. "It ends now." "No," Savannah corrected softly. "It begins." The hidden room had exposed a truth far deeper than anyone had imagined. Now, the world would see it too, and they would fight back. Together. The morning air over Ashwood Hollow felt strangely quiet, as if the entire town were holding its breath. Dew clung to the edges of Savannah's boots as she stepped out onto the porch of the farmhouse, the silence punctuated only by the distant call of a lone crow. The tension from the previous night still lingered like smoke in the air. Inside, the living room was filled with open files, scattered photographs, and the musty scent of paper and wood. Eli Barrett sat at the table, sipping a steaming mug of coffee, eyes glued to his laptop as a document upload progress bar crawled across the screen. "State Attorney General's office should have everything by noon," Eli said without looking up. "This time, we're not just shouting into the void. They're listening." Savannah nodded, the lines of exhaustion etched deep beneath her eyes. The attack on the farm had rattled her more than she was willing to admit. But the drive inside her, the fire Arthur Miller had sparked, was stronger now than ever. Just then, the sound of tires crunching gravel drew their attention. 2 unmarked SUVs rolled into the driveway, followed by a sheriff's cruiser. Savannah and Eli exchanged a quick glance before stepping outside. Out of the first SUV stepped Agent Lisa Hart from the Missouri Bureau of Investigation. Behind her, 2 uniformed officers and a man in a pressed gray suit emerged. "Miss Miller," Agent Hart greeted, her tone professional yet firm. "We've reviewed the documents sent overnight. Based on what we've seen, a full criminal investigation is now underway. We have a warrant to search the Bishop estate and associated facilities." Savannah felt a wave of disbelief and relief crash over her at once. It was happening. After decades of silence, someone was finally going to knock on the Bishop's door, not with an offer, but with consequences. That same afternoon, local news exploded. Helicopters circled the estate of Bishop Agricultural Industries. Patrol vehicles blocked the front gates. Reporters lined the edge of the property, shouting questions no one dared answer. Savannah and Eli watched the coverage from the living room, their eyes flicking between images of authorities raiding Bishop's corporate offices and the news ticker scrolling across the screen. Breaking: state officials. Raid Bishop estate in connection to environmental scandal calls flooded the town. By nightfall, the whispers had turned into a full-throated roar. The townsfolk of Ashwood Hollow, once too afraid to speak, now gathered at the community hall. Victims, farmers, old neighbors, faces Savannah hadn't seen in years, all sharing stories that echoed her grandfather's journals. Just when the momentum seemed unstoppable, a familiar face reemerged: Dr. Kyle Monroe. He arrived at Savannah's front door, bruised but alive. Agnes and Eli were stunned, speechless. "They held me in a hunting cabin outside Pine Valley," Monroe explained, his voice hoarse. "No phone, no way to get out. Took me 3 days to slip the cuffs. I ran until I found a ranger station. They made sure I disappeared, just like they threatened." Savannah stepped forward. "Can you testify?" "I will. I should have done it a long time ago." The following week was a blur. Savannah, Eli, and Agnes accompanied Dr. Monroe to Jefferson City, where his sworn testimony, combined with forensic evidence, was entered into the public record. Soil samples, internal Bishop memos, and whistleblower statements painted a devastating timeline of corruption, cover-up, and death. The most damning moment came when Dr. Monroe confirmed that Carol Miller, Savannah's grandmother, had suffered from a rare form of cancer directly linked to the chemical compounds found in the water, the same compound that Bishop Industries had tested and buried decades earlier. The hearing chamber fell into a stunned silence. That evening, CNN and several national outlets broadcast the story across the country. An expose titled "Buried by Greed, the Bishop Scandal" aired during prime time, bringing Savannah's story and Arthur Miller's legacy to millions. The fallout was immediate. The bishops began moving assets out of the country, funneling funds through shell corporations in Panama, Belize, and the Cayman Islands. But they were too late. Federal agencies froze over $90 million in Bishop assets within 48 hours. Russell Bishop and his father were brought in for questioning. Russell's smug composure cracked as he was forced to answer for his family's crimes. Both men denied knowledge of the contaminants, the surveillance, and the bribery. But the paper trail, meticulously documented by Arthur Miller and digitally preserved by Savannah, told a different story. As Savannah stood outside the courthouse, a journalist thrust a microphone toward her. "Miss Miller, how does it feel to finally see the truth come out?" She paused for a moment, her gaze lifting to the Missouri sky. Like someone finally turned on the light in a room that had been dark for far too long. But she knew it wasn't over yet. The Bishops had deep roots. The court battle would be long and ugly. The public eye, fickle as ever, could shift. But Savannah had one thing now she hadn't before: momentum. She turned to Eli, who gave her a small, proud nod. They were no longer just survivors of a buried truth. They were its torchbearers, and the flame was only just beginning to spread. The sun crept over the hills of Ashwood Hollow, its golden light spilling across the fields like a quiet promise of renewal. Dew glistened on the tall grass surrounding the Willow Creek farmhouse, and the breeze carried the scent of spring blossoms. Savannah Miller stood on the freshly painted porch, sipping black coffee from a tin cup, watching the land that had changed her life. It had been 3 months since the federal court froze the Bishop Corporation's assets and launched a full-scale investigation into the environmental crimes Arthur Miller had documented for decades. The story had gone national. Savannah's once simple inheritance was now a case study in whistleblowing and justice. Inside the farmhouse, everything had been restored. The floors were refinished, the peeling wallpaper replaced, and the secret basement archive preserved and sealed off for official evidence handling. Savannah had partnered with state environmental agencies to convert the property into a research and community justice center. What was once a decaying monument to corruption now stood as a beacon of accountability and renewal. Eli Barrett arrived mid-morning, the familiar sound of gravel crunching under his boots, bringing a small smile to Savannah's face. He carried a newspaper in one hand and a to-go coffee tray in the other. "Thought you could use an extra shot of espresso today," he said, handing her a cup. Savannah took it with a grateful nod. "What's the headline?" He held up the paper, and the bold print read, "Bishop hearing goes to trial. No dismissal, no deals." The accompanying photo showed Russell Bishop, expression grim, entering the courthouse, surrounded by reporters. "One step closer," Eli said, settling beside her on the porch. "They tried every loophole, every motion to delay or dismiss. Didn't work. They're out of friends in the judicial system." Savannah stared out over the land, quiet for a moment. "You think this ends with them behind bars?" Eli hesitated. "I think it ends with people knowing the truth. And maybe that's what matters more." She nodded slowly. "That hidden room, it started everything. I thought I was just here to clean out an old house. Instead, I uncovered the truth that defined my family and nearly destroyed it." They sat in silence, the weight of the past months lingering in the air like mist. Inside, boxes of archival materials waited to be transferred to the new research staff. The State Historical Society had already approved a permanent exhibit on Arthur Miller's work. Local schools planned field trips. Even the University in Columbia, Missouri had offered Savannah a fellowship to lecture on environmental justice. But it wasn't accolades Savannah was after. It was healing. Later that afternoon, a familiar truck rolled up the driveway. Her parents stepped out, Martin and Elaine Miller, looking older than Savannah remembered, but with eyes filled with cautious hope. They hadn't set foot on the property in 15 years, not since the night they fled after threats were made against the family. Elaine wrapped her arms around her daughter, tears falling freely. Martin simply placed a weathered hand on Savannah's shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said softly. They walked the grounds together, Savannah explaining the soil decontamination efforts, the new water testing stations, and the plans for the Environmental Education Center. Martin lingered in the barn, running his hand along the weathered beams. "He used to fix things here," Martin said. "He believed if you built it strong enough, it could outlast any storm. Savannah smiled sadly. He was right. As the day faded into evening, the family gathered on the porch with Eli, watching the sun dip below the hills. Fireflies blinked into existence, and the sound of crickets filled the warm air. It was peaceful, honest, and something Savannah hadn't realized she needed until now. She rose quietly, stepping inside. In the living room, a photograph of her grandparents, young, proud, and smiling, rested on the mantel. Next to it, Arthur's journal, now stored in a glass case. Savannah traced a finger across its surface and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." Outside, the porch light flicked on as dusk settled fully over Ashwood Hollow. The fight wasn't over. There would be appeals, legal tactics, and smear campaigns. But Savannah was no longer just a legal archivist from Austin. She was a truth-bearer, a protector of her family's legacy, and a voice for those who had been silenced. Eli raised his coffee in a quiet toast. To Arthur Miller, Savannah touched her cup to his, to the hidden room that changed everything. And as night claimed the sky, Willow Creek Farm stood tall, a symbol that even the darkest secrets, when brought into the light, could sow the seeds of justice. From the moment Savannah Miller stepped onto the muddy road leading to her grandfather's forgotten farmhouse, she thought she was just settling an inheritance. What she didn't expect was to inherit a war, a legacy, a truth buried so deep it took an entire system to keep it hidden. But as you've seen, the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Through every page of Arthur Miller's journal, every whisper in that hidden room beneath the barn, Savannah began to uncover not just secrets, but power. The power of documentation, of memory, of refusing to look away, even when it's safer to forget. And when the Bishop family tried to silence that truth, Savannah didn't flinch, she didn't run, she stood up, and she made them listen. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from inside a courtroom. Sometimes, it starts with a brass key, a locked door, a dusty file, and someone brave enough to ask, why was this hidden? Savannah Miller didn't set out to become a voice for the voiceless, but in telling her grandfather's story, she gave countless others permission to tell theirs. This story reminds us that the strongest roots don't always grow in easy soil. Sometimes they grow in silence, in shame, in shadow, until someone shines a light and says, "No more. So what about you?" Has someone in your family ever carried a secret that changed everything? Or maybe you're the one ready to tell a story no one believed mattered until now. We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Your voice could be the start of someone else's breakthrough. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or lit a fire inside you, tap that like and subscribe button and join our growing community of story lovers, truth seekers, and everyday heroes. We've got more powerful stories coming your way. Real voices, hidden histories, and unforgettable moments that might just change the way you see the world. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, some legacies are left in will documents, but the most powerful ones, they're buried in truth, waiting for someone brave enough to dig them out. And if that someone is you, welcome. You're exactly where you need to be.